So Ricky Gervais recently released his 6th comedy special, Supernature, and it's getting quite a lot of attention. Some of it bad, some of it good, but from bad people. Either way, I feel it is fair to say that this stand-up show has received a lot of controversy. And I myself feel pretty conflicted about it as well. So if you have literally nothing else better to do, then let's talk about it. Shall we? Yeah, I mean, you're already here, may as well. So first up, you might be thinking to yourself, what gives this guy the right to criticise Ricky Gervais? What does he know about stand-up comedy at all? And
Peacock fact number 1, peacock feathers contain crystals. I know no one's trying to poach those guys. We're all going after the 2-ton elephant to get a tiny bit of ivory. No one's going after the little poncy birds made of sapphires.
I know it's not easy, but Ricky Gervais has been performing stand-up for over 20 years now. People often argue that Ricky Gervais isn't an actual proper stand-up comedian, he's a writer. But I've never agreed with that. This may be because his first live show, Animals, was my first ever exposure to him, and in fact my first exposure to stand-up comedy as a whole. And I watched his first 4 live shows on DVD on repeat until it formed part of my personality. I mean, when I watched his 4th stand-up show, Science, for the first time, I literally threw up from laughing so hard. And that's never happened to me before or since, so I liked it. So before I start slagging him off, I'm going to prefix this video by saying I love Ricky Gervais's body of work, from his TV shows to his radio shows to his Flanimals. And I even saw this exact show live at a work in progress gig a few years ago. I think why people often don't like him as a stand-up comedian is because his arrogant persona is so strong and integral to the performance that there is a lot of nuance in the act that often gets missed at first glance. I mean, less so nowadays, but I'll get into that. So, in his new show Supernature, he starts off by calling the audience cunts, and does some meta humour about stand-up comedy. All par for the course so far. But then he quickly transitions into some very basic and tired jokes about the trans community. So, Ricky Gervais has often said that you should be able to joke about any subject, and that people get confused between the subject of a joke and the target of a joke. Like, there's a bit later on in the special where he talks about gay people and AIDS. And I think that bit works. Whether it's actually funny is totally subjective, but I feel like the jokes here work as jokes because the subject of the joke is gay people with AIDS, but the target of the joke is homophobic Christians and their perspective on AIDS. Whereas when he's doing a bit about trans people, the subject of the joke and the target of the joke is just trans people. And yes, you should absolutely be able to joke about any subject, but if the target of that joke is also a marginalised group, then that can maybe come across a tiny bit like bullying. Or, as the comedian James Acaster puts it better,
edgy comedians, no one tells them what they can and can't say. They walk straight on stage, top of their specials sometimes, do 10 solid minutes just slagging off transgender people. Just straight out the gate, just making fun of transgender people. If people on the internet get upset about it, the comedian's always like, bad luck! That's my job. I'm a stand-up comedian. I'm meant to challenge people. If you don't like being challenged, don't watch my shows. What's the matter, guys? Too challenging for you? Oh yeah, because you know who's been long overdue a challenge? The trans community. Oh, they've had their guard down for too long, if you ask me.
And yes, later on in the show he says that he doesn't mean it, and that he has nothing against the trans community. And he might not, he probably doesn't, but the show has a lot of views, and I'm willing to believe that some of them watching are thick. Most people are. Not you watching this, you're great. But whether he means it or not, his audience who do believe these things may use this to reaffirm their beliefs, and when that happens on a large scale, such as, I don't know, a widely accessible streaming platform, where other comedians are doing the same thing, it might be an issue. And they weren't even good jokes, so I don't know why he spent all that time defending them. They're just the same old faux controversial jokes that lazy comedians have been reciting for years. If a man can identify as a woman, then I can identify as a pram. It's just lazy and feels tacked on for the sake of it. Oh, I get it. So you're saying that you can joke about anything, but you can't joke about trans people? No. I'm not saying that. I don't agree with that at all. In fact, Ricky Gervais's last special had a good joke about a trans woman. He says, Caitlyn Jenner, she became a role model for trans people everywhere, bravely breaking down barriers and destroying stereotypes. But she didn't do a lot for women drivers. Now, I think that joke works really well because the subject of the joke is about a person transitioning. but the target of the joke was Caitlyn Jenner killing someone in a car accident. Great joke. It had a go at someone based on their actions rather than who they are as a person. When I saw this show performed live back in 2019 when it was still a work in progress, I remember there being a lot less trans material, and I think it probably isn't, but it might be down to Netflix. So we all know Netflix is in trouble at the moment. They're hemorrhaging subscribers from every direction. So lately they've been using controversy and news articles to help publicise their show. They did it with Jimmy Carr the Traveller Community recently, and they've been doing it with Dave Chappelle for years. And if Netflix is going to milk the controversial angle to get views, then guess what? So can I by talking about them. In fact, it seems most people nowadays only know about Dave Chappelle from news articles. I've actually sat down and watched some of his shows, and I hated them. I remember reading an article about him once, and it said that he didn't write his own material, he just kind of went on stage and talked, and yeah, you can tell. Which is why some of his jokes are constructed like, gender is a fact. Every human being in this room, every human being on Earth, had to pass through the legs of a woman to be on Earth. This is a fact. Regardless of whether you agree with this or not, I mean, gender is more nuanced than sex, but whatever. The point is, there's no joke there. The audience doesn't laugh, they applaud. They're not laughing, they're clapping with agreement. And applause is not a substitute for laughter. He's not telling jokes, he's telling opinions, and people are applauding in agreement. And when that happens, that's no longer a comedy show, that's a rally. Netflix has defended Dave Chappelle's recent stand-up show in which he said this by saying it does not translate into real-world harm. And that is not true, because it's propaganda for idiots. It reaffirms these idiots' right to judge others unfairly, and when enough people with these platforms do it, it becomes part of a culture of being cruel to people. And audiences see people like Ricky Gervais and Dave Chappelle as role models. Like, you know where at school where some popular kid was having a go at a kid they didn't like because they were different in some way, then everyone who wanted to be friends with a popular kid agreed, and then everyone stopped talking to that other kid and started being mean to them? Yeah, it's like that. Bullying, basically. And then some of the people who have watched this start making transphobic comments and claim that it's just a joke, like the ones Ricky Gervais and Dave Chappelle were making. Because believe me, if professional comedians can't make those jokes work, then your mate down the pub after 5 beers certainly isn't going to make it work. A friend of mine pointed out that if he really wanted to integrate actual controversy, he could have taken experience from his own life and made some jokes at meat eaters' expense, him being a vegan and all. You know, use your position on a large platform to say something unique, where you are the minority trying to shift public perception. Or, you know, just don't, and maybe instead just, I don't know, try telling a joke or something? Like, being controversial should not be your top priority as a comedian. Being funny should. I used to be a school teacher, and one of the kids in my school was trans and ended up taking their own life. And in fact, 82% of transgender people have considered suicide and 40% have attempted it. And you know, hearing stuff like that, it just makes you think, maybe if we were just a bit nicer and more accepting to people who just want to express how they feel inside, then maybe almost half of all transgender people wouldn't see suicide as their only option. You know, just be nice to people, yeah? Sorry, that bit got a bit heavy, didn't it? Here's me pulling my trousers down for comedy.
I mean, all judge whether or not it's fine. That's it. That's as you see there's the Frosties 5 litres, right on the crown jewels. Yeah, no, thank you for laughing and stuff, because that is one thing stopping this from being a policeman. So,
In 2011, Ricky Gervais was in a special for HBO called Talking Funny, in which he discussed stand-up comedy with Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock and Louis C.K. Here, I feel, is the best insight we get into Ricky's philosophy for comedy, and there are things he says here which totally contradict what he does in his new show. He says he doesn't think it's enough to just make an audience laugh, he has to do something more, something only he can do. And maybe that's why he feels he has to bring up these controversial topics, as that's his brand. But the jokes he's doing can and have been done by other comedians, far worse comedians too. At one moment in the special, Chris Rock makes a point of saying that he makes jokes about what people do, not who they are, to which Ricky says he completely agrees with. Which again is no longer true of his new material. And not just in terms of trans people. Let's compare a joke he does in his new special with a very similar joke that he does in his 2007 special, Fame. Both jokes are on the subject of Asian xenophobia. In Fame, the target is the hypocrisy of the press, where he says that after a newspaper called him offensive, they had an article underneath about an Asian snooker player with the heading pot noodle. Whereas in the new special, he does a joke in which he says an Asian person is called Ling Ling and then pretends to pick up a phone. Here the target is Asian people. The concept of someone being called Ling Ling isn't a premise he's taken from anywhere. He's literally made it up based on Asian stereotypes, then used that to poke fun at Asian people. You see what I'm getting at? The nuance seems to be gone, and these offensive jokes that Ricky Gervais is known for are now just that, just offensive for the sake of it, with no hidden meaning or nuance to be found. Jerry Seinfeld said something very interesting in the Talking Funny special, that he won't swear in his stand-up shows, as he sees it as lazy. He found that some jokes he was telling that got a laugh when he swore didn't get the same laugh without the swearing. And he felt that it shows a lack of confidence in the material. And throughout the Supernature show, Ricky Gervais reuses so many of his jokes from past live shows. For example, the 2 Napoleons bit is an old joke. The only difference here is that he says 2 fucking Napoleons instead of 2 Napoleons, which personally just makes me feel like there's not only a lack of new material, but he also doesn't have confidence in the material that he's reusing. Some other bits that I noticed he reused included acting working class, which was in his Fame show, people being naked in the gym, which is from the radio show, and his mum saying she won't die, Rick. These are all bits which are nearly 20 years old at this point, and it might be because I've heard them before, but I just feel that these bits weren't performed as well as I know they can be. And there were some parts that I liked. His fears of getting old and breaking every bone in his body was great. I liked the bit about cats having barbed penises. And I feel that some of the best parts of his shows are where he talks about real life stories that have happened to him, like the story about his brother at the funeral. These used to be abundant in his older shows, but here most of his experience seemed to just be things that had happened to him on Twitter. So maybe he just had less to work with this show and just decided to phone it in. So I don't hate Ricky Gervais. I feel more like a disappointed parent, as I know he's capable of so much more than this, and the whole thing just felt like someone impersonating Ricky Gervais without understanding the subtlety of what made his comedy work so well. And he's confirmed that Netflix have already ordered another live show from him, so I'll be eagerly awaiting what I'm sure will be his return to form and not a deeper descent into lazy self-parody. Please? Thanks for watching. If you fancy it, then subscribe, maybe give this video a like, and don't forget to leave all your angry, hate-filled comments in the section below. And I'll see you again next time.
It was quite the accomplishment at the time, I thought. She's a bit beaten up and a bit rough, but I'm proud of her. It's the Rainbow Swimming Award. This is in the Rainbow Swimming Award scheme, endorsed by Tony the Tiger there, as you can see. He's not saying it's great, you can tell he's thinking it. Yeah, this is, I'm proud of it, I'm glad it was good. It was the 5 metres, that's the width of the pool, not the length. But,